Congratulations, you have been selected to participate in our game show for brilliant legal minds. Our topic today will be on contract law. Please take a seat. Joe and Tom have entered into a contract. These are the terms of the contract. Tom will tutor Joe for an hour each week on a Friday. Tom will teach Joe the law content by whatever means he sees fit. Tom may terminate the contract if Joe's tuition fees are unpaid for 14 days. Tom has just repudiated the contract. What do you think this means? A. Tom and Joe have not fulfilled the requirements of contract formation. B. Tom is unwilling or unable to perform his obligations under the contract. Or C. The contract has lapsed. The correct answer is B. So repudiation occurs when a party is unwilling or unable to perform its obligations under the contract.
What do you mean by unwilling and unable?
Well, the party must have failed its obligations so that it relates to the whole contract or a condition of the contract, or deprives the party of substantially the whole benefit of the contract.
A good test to use to determine whether a party has repudiated is the one outlined in Cheval and Builders Licensing Board.
Now that we know what repudiation is, in which scenario has Tom repudiated? A. Tom calls up Joe 2 hours beforehand and cancels the tuition because he is not feeling the law vibes today. B. Tom asks Joe if they could reschedule to another time. C. Tom cancels the tuition after being hospitalised. D. Tom conducts the tuition through a Skype call. The correct answers were A and C. A was correct, given that Tom was able to tutor Joe, but just wasn't willing. C was also correct, because although Tom was willing to tutor Joe, he was hospitalised and thus unable to do so.
So now that we know what repudiation is, what happens when a party repudiates a contract?
A. Accept the repudiation and terminate on these grounds. B. Affirm the contract and lose the right to terminate. C. Refuse to accept the repudiation and oblige the party to perform their obligations. The wronged party may accept the repudiation, terminate the contract and claim damages, or affirm the contract and therefore put aside their right to terminate. On to the next topic. What about when repudiation occurs from not one, but a combination of events?
The individual breaches, when combined together, can still amount to repudiation, right?
Correct. Sometimes a series of breaches that are individually too inconsequential to amount to repudiation can combine to do so. A real example of this occurred in a case involving a tenant who committed many breaches. These minor breaches, when combined, led to a right to terminate under common law, and more damages being awarded. Can you correctly name the case in which this scenario occurred? C. Progressive Mailing House and Tabali. Now let's look at instalment contracts. These are contracts where the obligations in either the delivery of the goods or the payment for them are divided into a number of instalments. If you breach just one of those instalments, it becomes a question of each case, as according to Section 38(2) of the Goods Act. Can you name the two main factors in the case of Maple Flock that led to a finding that the instalment contracts had not been breached? A. The quantitative ratio of the breach compared with the contract as a whole. B. The probability that the breach would be repeated. C. A reasonable person would not have regarded the breach as significant. A and B are correct. The small amount of breaches as a ratio of the total number of instalments and the practically negligible likelihood of repetition led to a finding that the breaches did not amount to repudiation.
What happens when a party seems to have repudiated but is acting on an erroneous interpretation of the contract?
Good question. In this case, we apply the willy-nilly test from DTR and Mona Holmes. Is the party persisting in its interpretation willy-nilly in the face of a clear enunciation of the correct interpretation? In the case of DTR and Mona Holmes, there was a contract for a subdivision for all 35 lots. The vendor, however, only believed they were obliged to lodge a plan of subdivision for the 9 lots that had actually been sold. Do you think DTR repudiated the contract through their incorrect interpretation? Yes or no? The correct answer is no. Here, there was no repudiation as DTR were not persisting willy-nilly. However, it is important to note that erroneous interpretation is only a defence to repudiation, not for any other breach. Thanks for playing. We'll see you next week for another episode of the game show for brilliant legal minds.